Hi, everyone. I am Christy Montgomery-Jones, and I'm so excited to be with you today. Let's test out the first. I've had one technical glitch. Let's test number two. Jordan, can you see my slides?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm just still at one technical glitch. I'm really excited to be with you today to talk about recruiting employers and working with employers. From the information that was shared in the chat, I also will say my background is in youth programs. That's where I got my start in workforce development. So seeing so many of you are working in that area, I'm always happy to dive into helping support youth to get that job, get the skill sets they need. So if you have questions today, I encourage you to share those in the chat. Jordan is going to be monitoring the chat for me because I'm not able to see it when I'm sharing my screen. Just a few bits of housekeeping. I will share first that there's a storm in my area. So if I disappear, I will try to come back, but I think we're all in stormy weather today, so I hope everyone's safe. If anything happens and you need to take cover, please take cover. Jordan mentioned he is recording the session, and I believe is going to put it on YouTube, and he's also going to share out the slide deck. I work for the American Institutes of Research, and on the screen is our policy around recording. Just to let you know, if there is a recording, you have the ability to stay off camera or to communicate in the chat if you don't want to be on audio. And in the realm of what makes an effective meeting, I really hope we can engage everyone, whether that's you asking questions or finding the information we share helpful. It's great if you can be heard and seen and be on camera. And if you have a question, let us know in the chat and us unmute and do some back and forth if you have things you'd like to dive into. I'm going to maximize microphone, so I'm going to share verbally with you. But if you're not speaking today, I will ask that you just remain on mute. And we're also going to maximize visual displays today. So I'm going to do my best not to read slides, but to give you some graphics and some key takeaways that once this session's ended today and you go back and say, oh, Christy shared something, but I can't remember what it was, you'll have the slides there for you. So I mentioned that my background was in youth programs. That's how I got started. I worked for the state of Tennessee in the WIA, the Workforce Investment Act at the time, youth program. And over my time, I ended up working in compliance, which is, of course, everyone's favorite area. I worked and oversaw state planning and local planning, so worked closely with local partners. I also was the state workforce board director, which really looked at sector strategies and business engagement. We created skills panels. And now I work for the American Institutes of Research, where one of the things I do is I work with the U.S. Department of Labor on their sector strategies frameworks. I also am a coach. They have H-1B grants, which fund, they're very similar to the JTAG grants. They fund training and business engagement, helping job seekers get the skills they need and then on to employment. So that's a little bit about my background. Today, we're going to focus really on building your business outreach skills. That is the number one goal, but definitely opportunities to ask questions, and then we'll do some wrap-up discussion towards the end. And I mentioned our goal is really providing business engagement tactics. So how do you put into practice business engagement? It's often talked about business engagement and sector strategies, but how do you make that actionable? So we're going to cover the opportunity and how to develop your solution. And I'm going to focus on 3 phases of business engagement that you can really plan your actions before, during, and after you engage business. So let's start talking about today's reality. Businesses are struggling to find workers. And if you think about during the pandemic, there was a lot of great resignations. People were resigning from their jobs, taking new positions, oftentimes able to make growth for their own compensation, opportunities, because there were not enough employees for the positions that were out there. And now we've seen some shifts. Right now, from all indications, if you stay on things like TikTok, and you follow anyone who gives job seeker advice, if you follow anyone who is in business or anyone who has been laid off recently, whether it's something like social media or you look at some of the reports, it's a harder job market. There are more people applying for positions. You also have people who maybe took off and they want to come back into the workforce, but they're struggling with childcare. Technology is rapidly changing. AI is becoming a bigger and bigger factor. You still have people who've transitioned jobs, and sometimes they've transitioned and they may not like where they're at, so they're looking to make another transition. There's also factors that lead into this around generational experiences. And one of the ones that I think is quite interesting right now is there's a whole generation of people who went through high school, maybe they were in college or some sort of training, it suddenly went virtual. And then their first jobs may have been virtual. And their interactions, they're having to learn how to collaborate and connect with people in a virtual world, or they're transitioning from virtual to in person, and there are just different skill sets required with that. So I'm excited about your grants because you're definitely on the forefront, looking at innovative employer-driven training models, looking at work-based learning, looking at addressing some of the challenges that came out post-COVID-19. And then also there's additional flexibility within your funding to cover some of those emergency costs. So as we talk today, we're going to really focus in on how your programs can provide flexibility, whether you're in the category that's working with job seekers and you're focusing on building their training and their skills, and you're working on work-based learning around targeted industries, whether you're looking at the employer focus and you're looking at upskilling their current workforce, or if you're working with youth, and it seemed like from the chat there were several of you working with the youth category, or you may be looking at family stability and job retention by covering some of those emergency costs. And one of the things that you all have in common is, regardless of which category you fit into, all programs have a priority on small and medium-sized minority-owned companies. All right, so that's a little bit of background around what we're going to talk about today. Now I really want to dive into how do you prepare yourself and your organization for success. And I'd like to start out this conversation around mindsets. Our minds are powerful, and being intentional about our efforts can only set us up for success. Sometimes we get in trouble if we go too fast. So really starting with mindsets is important. Your programs need to be developed in collaboration with business and include some sort of work-based learning, some experiential learning, some hands-on learning. One of the greatest pitfalls I see grants go through, regardless of whether it's a state level grant or it's something federally that's been announced, is when you get your grant, you're kind of in that hustle mode of, I've got to get policies in place, I've got to get staffing, I have certain metrics I have to start meeting. And in that hustle, what can really get lost is the opportunity to make sure that what you're building meets the needs of the person you're building it for them. And if you've seen the movie, The Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. That is not always true. You know, you can build a great model, but if you don't have feedback and input from the people that you're serving, it may miss the mark. If there could be some modification, even if it's small, that might make the difference in being able to create partnerships and collaborations. We're going to dive into that engagement a little bit more, but our second mindset is just really making sure you're thinking about how might you approach and leverage what businesses already do to help them achieve better results. So this isn't about creating whole new systems that stand alone. This is a lot focused around how do you use what's there and leverage it, whether that be from business or from other partners. And finally, your pitch is only as good as the programs that you can deliver, right? So you've got to have a good pitch, but the pitch has to be as good as the programs. But to get a good program, you have to start by really engaging and designing it with the people that you're meaning to serve. So I mentioned 3 phases of business engagement, and this is what I'm going to speak to today, and this is how our conversation is going to flow. The first part is around research and preparation. And before you engage anyone, research and preparation has to be done. Otherwise, you may end up getting an opportunity that your system's not set up for. The second phase is around initial conversation and follow up. And the third is around closing the deal. So that's how I'm going to pace today's conversation. Research and preparation. Most of us, if you go through education and you take an assessment or testing, you've got your diploma, you may think back on those courses that you took around statistics and research, and that's maybe not your favorite thing. I will say that business research can be really fun. And the more collaborative you make this with your team, the more impactful it can be. This doesn't have to be just reading through white papers. This is a lot of around gathering intel on the ground. So what you want to do is recognize business pain points that your program can address. Use the research to identify businesses who may need your services. And we're going to dive into each of these points. The next one is crucial, really researching and identifying existing business-led partnerships. Not just creating something new that they can only partner with you, but really understanding the ecosystem. And I tend to think of this as an environmental scan, looking in your local environment, seeing what partnerships are already in place, and seeing what's working and learning from that. And then preparing for the first conversation. In the workforce development world, we tend to think around things like skills gaps or attracting and retaining talent. And those are the challenges. But what I will say from my experience is that often when you engage business, they don't speak and share their challenges with you as much as they share what their indicators of those challenges are. So I'm going to give you an example. If I go to the doctor's office, I'm not necessarily going in knowing what disease, syndrome, ailment that I have. I'm going to go into the doctor's office and I'm going to just describe symptoms. And symptoms are like indicators. So if you engage someone in business, you may see that they are posting job openings online for a while. Or you may see that they're reposting job openings. You may also see that they're posting a lot of job openings for mid-level positions. I like to stay up to date in LinkedIn and see what companies are hiring. And what I do notice is if someone's reposted a position. And I recently saw one that had been reposted and now it's been posted for 2 months. So when I think about those symptoms of what's happening, if the job opening has been posted for a long time, there may be a skills gap in hiring. It may be that you need to find someone and train them. You may not find, the unicorn that has all of the specific skill sets you need. If you see that they're constantly reposting a job opening, this may be around the ability to attract and then retain talent. Businesses who are posting those mid-level positions, they may have the challenge of internally developing their existing talent. And if you're looking at, industry reports indicate short to mid-term range retirements, they may have a retiring workforce. There may be things that documented research will tell you. One place that I do like to go look for that research is industry associations. I oftentimes find, I was recently researching around aerospace, and some of the aerospace industry associations had lots of reports with succession planning and talking about the skills that they need. So if you're wanting to learn about an industry, going to those industry associations and seeing what reports and research have been provided there. And the business, may express interest in customized or technical training. That may mean that they have some advancing technology. So when you think about engaging business, just to recap, they're not always going to be able to tell you what their challenge is. Just like you go to the doctor and you may not always be able to tell him what you have, but you can tell the symptoms. So becoming a good listener for those symptoms and then reflecting on them will then help you become the doctor who is able to identify what the challenge area is. Jordan, I'm going to check in and just see if there's anything in the chat so far.
I think we had one question from Martha. I'm not sure. She if do you have names of similar grants that are like JTED that you're aware of? I'm not sure if that was mentioned earlier or not.
Yeah, so Jordan, my understanding of JTED is that those are Illinois specific grants. I am familiar with grants around the federal level that are H-1B. If you go to Workforce GPS, there's usually communities of practice. Does that help answer where they're around technology or whether they're focused on healthcare?
Okay, I think they were just asking for what the names of those like similar type of grants were, and where to
Yeah,
find them.
perfect. Perfect. And I'm gonna I will share some resources and see if I can share my screen and see where you can find some resources for similar grants. Oh, sorry, my slide's not advancing. I've got a little pop-up over here. Let's see if that works. All right. So we've talked about, being able to sort of diagnose what the challenges are. One thing I highly encourage your grant programs to do is to go about this in a collaborative way where your team shares information, but also where your team documents information. You can have someone who is great and who is experienced, and there are probably several of you on the call who've been doing business engagement for a while. But if that person is out sick or if that person's on vacation, if a business, if there's an opportunity to engage business, that information only stays with one person. And so what I encourage you to do is to really document what you're learning. When you're doing an environmental scan, identify industry sectors in your regional economy that fit the definition of the target industries for your grant. So in your grant, you would have identified a specific industry. Now you're going to start looking for businesses who have job openings that indicate there's a challenge, right? So if are they reposting things? Are you seeing lots of job postings? And then filter that down to small, medium-sized companies who are minority-owned businesses. And I encourage you to either keep a database or a spreadsheet. This can be very simple, but as you start looking at those companies, who are you identifying? What are you identifying about those businesses? What types of job postings do they have? And put a date with it, because what you might find is when you look next month or next quarter, those job postings, those companies who had job postings may be experiencing something and they're not posting any longer. So really capturing that information. Look at those job descriptions. What are they hiring for? What are the skills they're hiring for? That's going to make sure that you're more informed. And also, as you do research, if you look at things like industry association websites, capturing any links. If you find a report around succession planning in aerospace, and that's the industry you're serving, keep a tab of just resources and current labor market information. And having the ability to share that with your team. One, if anyone else wants to learn, they're not duplicating effort and using time, like staff time resources. They can go to one source and you can start collecting information. I also encourage you to have the information in a shared spreadsheet, but have focused, intentional conversations across your staff where you reflect on what you're finding. So if someone is doing research around industry associations and someone's doing job postings, have those people share what they're finding so that everyone's becoming more informed of what's happening in your ecosystem. There's a saying, a rising tide lifts all ships. So you want to bring all people and your staff up to speed at the same time versus everyone individually having to repeat that research. Now that you've understood your ecosystem, you've done some research, you also want to begin to reflect on what you're offering to business. So thinking about the return on investment for them, considering how you would best utilize JTED to offer value to business. And some ways that you might offer value, and I'm giving you a few little, takeaways that if you want to take these and put this in your material, please do. But as you think about, does your program remove or address a risk or a barrier for the business? Does your program increase retention? Are you have the ability to assist with recruitment, hiring, onboarding, and advancement of workers? Are there other things that you can connect them to, like tax credits? If you're partnering with vocational rehabilitation, other supports that those programs may leverage. You might think about how you also collaborate with your state, regional, and local resources and partnerships. Now, up until this point, several of you are probably very familiar with business engagement, but this is for anyone who's new. It can be very intimidating to take on a position that engages business when you don't work in that industry. And that's okay. If you're experiencing that, that is okay. Oftentimes, we can let our fears keep us in a place of like being functionally frozen, right? You don't really know what to do. You've done a little bit of research, but you're afraid to make that next step and start reaching out to business. And there are lots of resources. I've already talked about a few. So to recap those, industry association web pages. You can connect with your local chamber of commerce. You can go to the Rotary meetings. You can, be mobile on your feet and go engage in spaces where they're talking, where you hear those business leaders talking about their challenges, and that will help inform you. There's also ONET. A lot of people are intimidated by ONET because you have to know how to find, there's maybe a Nexus code, or you have to learn how to use that system. So one resource that I highly recommend, I call this kind of a cheat sheet. The U.S. Department of Labor, they have competency models. And a competency model is really, for the U.S. Department of Labor, it is a pyramid of the skills. It is the key knowledge, skills, and abilities that an industry needs. So as you're thinking about, okay, I want to know what soft skills or personal effectiveness skills they need, what specific workplace skills or technical skills they need. This organizes those skills by level. And when you get the PowerPoint, you will have access to the links where you can go view these. But I have on the slide for you an example of a competency model for renewable energy. And what I recommend doing is, if I'm going to reach out to renewable energy companies, before I do that, I would go look at the competency model for renewable energy. The first level is going to tell me the personal effectiveness competencies. Those are like soft skills. They're essential skills. There's, lots of people have different names for those, but it's going to tell me the interpersonal skills, professionalism. And when I go to the website, I'll be able to hover and some of those will come up. There also will be academic skills, things like basic computer skills, reading and writing. Those are going to have already been documented for me. And these competency models are created by industry. So industry associations and subject matter experts from different organizations. Then there will be workplace competencies. So things like adaptability, flexibility, teamwork, planning, organizing, scheduling. These are things that, to work in this industry, you need to have these skills. Working with tools and technology. And then as you go up to the fourth tier, you start seeing across the industry, what are those technical competencies that are needed? So fundamentals of energy and power, energy efficiency, renewable energy, quality assurance, policies and laws. These are just general things you need to be aware of. And then as you go to a tier 5, you might dive into, okay, I'm looking for positions in solar energy, and you'll be able to see those. I'm going to try to share my screen. Now, I've had one technology faux pas so far. Are you still seeing my screen, Jordan?
Yes, it's on the, yep, you just brought up your web browser.
Perfect.
Competency
Okay.
model clearinghouse.
So maybe this is going to be a bit easier than I was thinking it would be. But when you come to the competency model clearinghouse, there are 31 models. You click on industry models, and the models are listed there, and they're already categorized. So energy and utilities, manufacturing, healthcare, information, accommodations and food services. And then underneath those categories are specific models. So I'm going to go to renewable energy. This is going to tell me a little bit about when this model was created. Renewable energy is a little bit older. Some of these are just being released this year or being updated this year. They do come back and they update these quite often. but I'm going to be able to see the industry associations who created these, which tells me this should have some validity because industry is leading this. And then I'm going to see the image that you saw on the PowerPoint a moment ago, but I'm going to be able to hover. So if I want to know what interpersonal skills are, displaying skills to work with people. If I want to know what teamwork is, it's develop capacities used to work with others. So I can just hover and get sort of a quick takeaway. But if I go to the download the industry model and worksheets, there will be a PDF version. And if you click on it, I'll scroll up to the top, you'll see there's the model. And this PDF is going to give you much more detail for each of these layers. So let's say in renewable energy, we want to learn about energy efficiency. We'll go to page 14. Now I'm understanding that someone who goes into this field needs to understand how energy efficiency is connected to the production of energy supply and how to make the case for energy efficiency. So just to recap why I'm sharing this with you, I don't have to be an industry expert before I have a conversation. I can get past my own fear and I can do research. I can see what job postings are out there. But if I want to see what specific skill sets someone may need, I can go to this competency model and I can review it and I can quickly understand what those personal effectiveness, soft essential skills are. I can understand what the industry-wide skills are. So it just makes it just a little bit easier to find information. Let's see if I can go, some of these links are in the PowerPoint as well, but someone asked about, are there other programs similar that you might want information? If you go to workforcegps.org, that is the U.S. Department of Labor's technical assistance site. If you go to communities here, anything that says H-1B, those are grants that are industry focused that are going to be doing similar things. So rural healthcare, One Workforce is around advanced manufacturing and also technology. You can see, let's see, trying to see how far back. Yeah, skills training. So that's a great resource also. While I was screen sharing, if you want to learn what others are doing, that's a great place to find it. So any questions I'm not seeing yet, Jordan, in the chat?
No questions. Does anyone want to come off mic and ask anything? If not, we can continue.
I have a question.
Sure, Jessica.
So I know that there's a list of different maybe industries you can explore, right? I know there's one industry that I work in that might be a little bit more niche, like considering the film sound design portion. If I was not able to find that on the website to kind of see what core competencies or skills somebody might need for that, what would you recommend to do?
So just to recap what I heard, it might be film design.
Mm-hmm.
So what you might do is back out. So like if you're niche, back out and see what industry would that fall under. So would that fall under technology and information, and see what the first thing I would do is find what sort of generic industry does that fall within and what resources are available there. And then start thinking about, okay, well, let me do just a Google search. In the age of AI, you also could even put this in something like ChatGPT and ask them for what competencies are needed, what skill sets are needed, or also you can ask them for what websites or resources might they recommend. And between ChatGPT and if you have access to like Microsoft Copilot is great at giving you website links. ChatGPT does, but it's typically 2 years ago. The information from the internet is the stop point, right? So you still might need to do a Google search, and just sort of be broad. You can go to things like ONET, which is U.S. Department of Labor's labor site, and do a search for that and see what you find. And those keywords will also help you more effectively search on ChatGPT and Google.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Jessica. That was a great question. All right, Tina, I see a hand up.
Good morning. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. And thank you, Ms. Jessica, for that question because it prompted me to think about the younger generation. Uh, from my perspective, many of them are not necessarily, or I shouldn't say many, some of them are not necessarily interested in like the traditional career pathways. And I was wondering if you could share any research literature that suggests what our young people from the ages of 18 to maybe 30 are truly interested in. What is it? Because, you know, you heard Ms. Jessica mention arts and films, and I don't want to develop programming for 18 to 30-year-olds in something like manufacturing, and they truly are interested in, you know, arts and things related to arts and
Yeah.
culture and so forth, and even IT, absolutely.
Right. Tina, I love this question. And the next section of this is going to kind of dive into that. But since we are thinking about research, I'll go ahead and kind of connect the dots a bit. So not creating a program in a silo of just like your internal team is key. So touching base with who is there locally, community colleges, other technical schools that offer you know, they may not even necessarily offer like an associate's level, but they may offer training certifications. Talking to those, you know, counselors or career coaches there, talking to your local workforce boards and seeing what they're seeing, because they all have youth programs. You can find things that are going to tell you things at like a national level, and I can look for some of that information and share that with Jordan if I see anything. But the best source is to find people who are doing this work and who have regional information. So whether that's labor
Mhm.
market information of what openings are there, but also people who
Mhm.
are actively engaging this age group and are able to hear from them. Because one of the things we do know is oftentimes when you're in high school, you don't know what you want to be as a career. You want to have some exploration, and you really need a career pathway. You need someone to help put you where you're aligned to your interest, to have, you know, aptitude tests or to have career interest assessments. And so connecting to career pathways programs at your local high schools and seeing what they have created and why, right? Was there interest? Was it because they a local industry wanted or really had a skills gap and wanted to find a pipeline, so they set up this training to be able to set people up? Because what you don't want to do is train someone in something and have them spend their time and investment and there not be a job at the end of it, right? So this is about creating a system where you do want to align it to their interests, but you also want to align it to what's available in your area. And really, the way to do that is to connect with people in your area who are already serving those populations.
Wonderful. Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks, Tina. Great questions. I love these. We're going to dive into the next section, which is really around building those relationships. So you're identifying valid pain points and you're learning the business's culture. You're introducing your program in the context of existing business practices, and you're exploring and you're respecting partnerships that the business may already have in place. Again, this is around not just creating your program for the sake of creating your program, but really meeting the needs of industry and creating programs that if you're serving youth, that they would be interested in receiving training and being connected to employment. And relationships are built on trust. These, you know, building trust is not a difficult concept, but the amount of energy it puts into building those trusting relationships takes effort. You know, it takes going to community chamber of commerce meetings and listening and learning about what's going on. It takes reaching out to your local workforce boards or education. Your community colleges have boards as well, oftentimes that have business there. But the people who are serving job seekers, whether they're youth or they're older, you know, if it's a career counselor, a counselor at school, you know, those are people who are going to be able to give you intel. All right, we talked about valid pain points. Again, this is kind of like being the doctor. You're going to have to figure out based off the symptoms sometimes what the pain point is. Really starting with a problem statement and not a solution. And what this means is where I see grant programs often go wrong is you create a flyer and you talk about your services and how great your services are. And you lead with that. And I say you, meaning all of us, right? Like any of us could do this, just by human nature. We want to talk about these great programs that we have. But if you really focus on what you have, you're not in listening mode and you're not in understanding mode. And I'll give you an example. A few years ago, right before the pandemic, I needed to buy a new vehicle. My engine had an issue. It wouldn't run anymore. It was an older vehicle. My husband and I had a conversation. Okay, we want to buy a new vehicle. And I said, why don't we get a truck? I work remotely. I'm not commuting in. We need to be able to pull a trailer because our pastime, our hobby is we're competitive barbecue cooks. And why don't we get a truck that can pull the trailer? But at the same time, I work remotely. So if we are on the road, I need to be able to have a plug-in in the vehicle to charge my laptop. I need to be able to, make sure that I have some conveniences. His asks were, I want a large gas tank. I don't want to have to keep stopping for gas. And if we're pulling a trailer, we're going to use more gas. So we knew what we wanted when we went. We went to 5 different car lots. They were all of the same brand. When they found out I was the one looking for a vehicle, they kept trying to show me cars. They didn't really listen. I'm 6 feet tall. I don't like driving a car. It hurts my back to get in and out. If I were going to get a smaller vehicle, it would be an SUV. So when they started taking me to the cars and they realized that didn't work, when I said we were in the market for a truck, suddenly they stopped talking to me and they started talking to my husband. And he cared that it had a gas tank and he cared that it could pull, but he knew I was financing the vehicle and it was going to be the one I had to drive. So he wasn't very talkative. He was wanting them to talk to me. And 4 of the car lots that we went to missed the mark. They told us what they had. Now, did they have great products? Did they have vehicles? Did they have a vehicle that I could have drove around? Yes. But did they listen to what I needed? Did they try to put me in a car when that wasn't my need? Did they try to go to my husband's preferences because they thought typically the man's going to drive the truck? When we found someone who listened, we found a truck and a color we could both agree on, a large gas tank, and it had outlets that I can plug in and I can work comfortably from the road. And that is who got our business, is the person who really listened and engaged. They didn't just try to sell us from the get-go. And they also didn't assume that they knew what our needs were based off of our appearances. So when we talk about engaging business, it's the same thing. If you take your flyers and you just try to tell them what services you have, you may miss the mark. You may turn them off. You may be like my husband, kind of being silent and laughing because they kept trying to sell him, a bigger and bigger truck, which wasn't our need. Also wasn't in a price point that I wanted. If you listen and you start the conversation, and that's why research is important and engaging others is important. If you listen, then you can go with a problem statement. Do they have a skills gap? Asking questions to understand, how have they solved their challenges previously? What has worked? What hasn't worked? This is where we're kind of a little bit in like inspector mode, right? And we're using our ears a lot. We're not necessarily telling them the solution that's going to meet their needs. We're asking. And we also want to find out who are they already working with. Some existing business practices, businesses have processes, but they might struggle to adapt. So things like recruiting and assess potential workers may be an area you're able to help. Onboarding, staff training. Not all businesses can offer additional help with retraining their staff. So you might be able to speak to them from that point of view. There's also professional development and career advancement, mentoring that you may be able to provide, that especially if you're looking at someone who's younger, who's maybe been in that virtual learning environment and maybe the soft skills needs a little bit more help. You can offer mentoring that takes some of that off of the business. And then you have opportunities for supportive services, things that you're able to help those job seekers deal with that make it easier for business because those needs are met. So childcare, transportation, work clothing, life skills training, and our mentoring. We want to also be careful that we speak the language of business. So in workforce development, we talk about outreach and placement. We talk about skills, competencies, responsibilities. We talk about on-the-job training. Business speak, we need to use the language they use. We want to talk about recruitment and interviewing. You know, skills, competencies, and responsibilities. I showed you the competency models that DOL has provided. They're not going to know what a competency model is, but you will gain knowledge of what the skills are. What you're going to talk to them about are their job descriptions and their position responsibilities. You're going to talk to them about internal and external training and onboarding. You're going to talk to them about mentoring and supervision of work performance reviews, merit-based increases and performance increases. And instead of career pathways, you may talk to them about positions and title changes. All right. Once you have those first conversations, so you've researched and now you're engaging, you may be going out into these Chamber of Commerce or community gatherings where businesses are. Once you engage with them and you've listened for what their needs are, you want to leave that first meeting understanding the employer pain points, right? You're not going in and telling them what their pain points are. You've really asked and you've listened for understanding. You always want to set up a next conversation with the takeaways and schedule the next meeting. So I hear you might need help with, your employees having childcare or transportation help. Let's have another conversation where we can explore how we might support you with that. You understand that there will also be multiple future calls. This is about building relationships, building trust, and you want to make sure that they have an incentive for meeting with you again. Make sure that you're responding to them with their challenges, not just your solutions. You want to pinpoint what support you can offer. You want to also provide examples of how you've supported other businesses. You want to, if you have another business who maybe you might, could refer them to, oh, hey, Sally at so-and-so business, we've worked with them. I know that you guys are in this chamber meeting together. They could tell you about the success we've had. Offer opportunities to connect with peers. And you also want to clearly articulate the value of working with you. Flyers are great, but you want to make it specific to their needs. What did you hear in that first conversation? You also want to make sure that you're promising less and delivering more. You can't necessarily solve all of their issues, but you can help them with this issue. And then as you're there, you may be able to learn more and support them in other ways. All right, phase 3 is around getting the commitment. So you've addressed their concern. You also want to approach engagement with business, just know on the forefront, you want to develop a relationship with the person you're talking to, but their organization is made up of many people. So if it's someone who is an HR manager, you might also need to meet with people who are in the executive level, or you may need to meet with a manager who's over the workflows or the areas that they're hiring. You want to bring the right partners to the table. And this is where, if you go back to the research, the more familiar you are with the programs in your area, if someone comes up with a challenge that you can't necessarily address, you might could go together with them and you address one part of the challenge and the other person address the challenges that aren't under the services your grant provides. And closing the deal. So the research phase is important. The conversation and the building the relationship is important. But taking that to closing the deal is where it's kind of like the art of the deal. You've put all this effort into it. You've been mindful. You've prepared yourself. You've built a team and a program around what the company needs. And now you're trying to close the deal. So you want to get a commitment in writing to participate in the program. And this can be as simple as sending a follow-up email and just recounting, hey, here's some things I heard, and here's some ways we can help you. You've left that first meeting and hopefully you've set up the next engagement. If you weren't able because they didn't have their calendar with them, you want to reach back out. And even if you get an email with them saying, yes, we'd be interested in participating, that's one form of written agreement. Now, there are MOUs and other things that legally you may have to have in place, but I think starting with something simple, just getting their interest, a commitment to their interest in learning more. You can have a sign-up sheet that says, hey, if you'd like to learn more, if you give us your information, we'll set up a call. So getting things in writing do not have to be long, lengthy contracts, right? Like you can start simple with them. And then the most important thing is if you tell someone you're going to call or set up a meeting or send them an email, do what you say you're going to do. You know, if you say you're going to help them with childcare, make sure that that's what the conversation is and that you put the steps in motion to engage them to figure out how that structure might work. And always make sure you're not overpromising and make sure that you're following through. Now, I've mentioned this a few times. If you hear a few phrases where it feels like we're on repeat, that's because this is sort of a cyclical process. And the research you do to understand who might offer services, making sure you're partnering with those in your local economy. You know, focus on occupations. This, to Tina's question earlier, focus on occupations with the greatest demand now and 3 months from now. If you focus on an occupation that's not hiring, you might help someone with their career interest, but what are they going to do if they go through all of that training and then they come out and there's no job? They're going to be very disengaged. They're going to be frustrated. They're going to feel like they've wasted their time. So this is why up front, talking to those partners who have a great understanding of who's hiring, what are occupations that your population, so if you're serving youth, that are interested in and they can find easy entry into. Work with other partners to ensure fast turnarounds and low business investment. So another way to say that is if you're talking to a company and you know what their challenge is, don't hold a meeting with that company where you talk to the other partners in the area and figure out what services each of you can provide. Businesses don't necessarily have extra time to be on all meetings. Pull your partners together, come up with a game plan, and then go back to the business and share what services you can provide to them. You know, using sector strategies and looking at specific industries and engaging businesses. So if you have a success, basically what this means is if you have success with a program or there's an existing program in place that you can partner with, businesses are more likely to trust the word of other businesses who've had success. You can tell them the success and it may have impact, but a quicker way to get deeper impact is engaging other business partners to talk business to business directly and validate the services that you're offering. I know we're close to time, so I'm not going to go click on all of these resources, but in this slide is business engagement tools. There's one section which is WinTAC, that is the technical assistance for vocational rehabilitation. There are lots of links there for business engagement. On Workforce GPS, which is what I showed you earlier, where those communities of practice are, business engagement and apprenticeship is there. There's also a link in this PowerPoint to business services delivery recovery resources. So especially post-pandemic, how to engage businesses who are maybe still in recovery mode. And there's a tip sheet as well. Jordan, I'm going to share the next slide and let you talk about this one.
Yeah, so I did a little bit of this work before taking on this role as well. As far as to like meeting and thinking like a business, that becoming an impact employer from jobs for the future is a really good kind of way, like when you're thinking of your marketing materials, of how do I get straight to the point and what does the employer care about, and highlighting that in a short and easy to understand way. So there's examples and all of that. So just kind of think of like when I'm advertising, am I using kind of a similar framework that's simple, quick to read, addresses those pain points right away? Like why should an employer even waste time reading it? So that's just kind of like a reference point that I thought was really good. The IDHS has kind of a pitch guide that's talks about a lot of the things we talked about today. It's kind of laid out at the PDF as far as like the process, what you should do to be prepared, kind of all of these steps that we've been talking about. Another thing is like kind of thinking of a couple WorkNet tools. So there's a strengths, weakness, opportunity, and I'm forgetting the T.
Threat.
So it's kind of a WorkNet, and each of those bubbles is kind of like, hey, with the program that we want to offer to employer, what are the different things in all of these categories that we can offer that are potential threats? who's our competition, what does the business see as a potential downside to joining us. Just kind of trying to look at your programs through the lens of the employer on who you're offering it to, and not as an educator, and working through that and the presentation checklist. At the end of the day, you're kind of interviewing when you make that first contact with the employer, like talking to them is kind of interviewing, like, are you going to do what you're going to say you're going to do? Can you deliver on the promises you're making? So part of that's as simple as like, hey, if I invite them to my office to give them a presentation, do I have everything I need to make that go smoothly? And then the last one is a webinar. Just again, it's kind of focused on apprentices, but again, is just some of these same talking points that's just from the workforce GPS system as far as collaborating with employers and keeping those going over time. We got a few minutes for discussion. I think we got time for a couple questions. So does anyone have any comments, questions, things that they're doing like this already that's worked well for them in your specific areas?
I have a question. In terms of like the resources shared with the business engagement tools, do any of those organizations kind of do like, I don't know, one-on-one calls or something like that if you needed feedback based on something that you're trying out or something like that?
So is your question about what's in the resources, or is your question, I think I'm hearing your question is really about what are ways to get feedback? Are you
Yeah,
asking the latter? Okay.
yeah.
So a couple ways you can get feedback is I always go to friendly friends first, right? Like people who are friendly. So that might be something like a chamber of commerce or an industry association, because their role is really to be a spokesperson for the industry, and they can oftentimes give you feedback or tell you someone that you might speak to. If you have personal friends who work in those industries, you also can reach out to them, and starting small as you're designing is always helpful. If you start having one-on-one conversations, I always encourage you to start with people who are already friendly and you already have a relationship with, because if you start with people that you don't have existing relationships with, their first interaction is going to be you needing something from them and them giving you something, right? And so then when you go back to re-engage, they may already think, oh, I've talked to them, I've given them all I can give them.
Mhm.
And that's one reason why group feedback, if you have something you'd like feedback, and you have a group of friendly people that across your organization, this is a group of people who's, we have established relationships with, you might send an email and maybe have a document in a Google Doc where they can all give comments in one place. Or you might meet them if there's you might get on the agenda of an industry association that's meeting, a Rotary Club, a community organization, a workforce board, and get feedback that way, sort of collectively. There are different ways to do it, and I think it also depends on the current existing relationships that you have. One other thing I would say is engaging your local workforce development board. Workforce boards already have a majority business, and they have staff who support the board and programs. And so if you engage those staff, they may be able to give you feedback because they've created other things. Similar to, if an education community college has a board, you might engage with other programs who've already created things to see if it aligns with what they've learned. And they might be able to give you people who might be willing to give friendly feedback.
Mm. Thank you.
Anyone else
Jordan.
before we wrap up? Otherwise, we can, go ahead and wrap up. So if anyone has additional questions, you can go ahead and send them to me, and if they're for Christy, I'll make sure that she gets those. We will be sharing all of the PowerPoint and all the links and a link to the YouTube video for this session as well, if you want to view it later or share it with some of your coworkers who aren't able to make it. Otherwise, thank you all for attending. It was a great session. Thank you again, Christy, for being such a great speaker for us, and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday.